Welcome back to the Bitcoin Layer. My name is Demian Schatt. I'm a researcher here at TBL, and today we are excited to bring back Yaël Ossowski. Yaël is the Deputy Director at the Consumer Choice Center and a Fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Yaël, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Demian. Pleasure.
Of course. Yaël, with it being tax season right now, the IRS broker rule has really been a hot topic. Can you explain what it is, why it's got crypto users riled up, and where it stands after the Senate's March 4th vote to repeal it?
So this one was really interesting. This was a rule that emanated from the IRS during the time of Biden's administration. And what this had done is attempted really to force any kind of decentralized finance platform, DeFi platform, to basically collect taxpayer information. That meant that many of these protocols where people are degenning all day and swapping coins and doing all these kind of things, any of these platforms, think of a Uniswap, PancakeSwap, any of these things, they would actually be required to collect any kind of taxpayer information, social security number, name, address, and then also perform the Know Your Customer anti-money laundering definitions as they are in the Bank Secrecy Act. This would apply to everything in the DeFi space. So this was a rule that was put forward by IRS. It was essentially what was the law of the land. Everybody was trying to follow it. You did have a few lawsuits that popped up, as always does in our system. And essentially we thought this would be the law, but there was a good amount of opposition from Republicans in Congress and also Democrats. And then actually they put together something called a Congressional Review Act. And this essentially means that Congress nullifies a regulatory rule from an agency. And that's precisely what first the House did and then the Senate just recently. And they voted to nullify that particular regulation. And that means that once Trump signs it, which he hasn't done yet, he's promised to do so hopefully by the end of the week, that would mean that the IRS DeFi broker rule would no longer apply. So you don't have to send your taxpayer information if you're using any of these platforms. You're not having to if you're trying to swap certain things. But if you're primarily on a Bitcoin exchange or some kind of brokerage, the normal tax rules will apply, fortunately or unfortunately. But this was really just about DeFi. But it did mean that there were different rules that were going to be put in place and a lot of impracticalities when it comes to actually getting that information and trying to find everybody compliant. I think this is a very good move generally for the Bitcoin and crypto policies in the United States, showing that Congress is, number one, reasserting its power, which we definitely need, and then number two, just showing that there is a way forward when it comes to innovation, particularly with Bitcoin and crypto innovation. And I think that's a very good thing.
As Bitcoin's role in the global financial landscape evolves, understanding its potential impact on your wealth becomes increasingly crucial. Whether we see a measured adoption or accelerated hyper-Bitcoinization, being prepared for various scenarios can make the difference between merely participating and truly optimizing your position. This is why Unchained developed the Bitcoin Calculator, a sophisticated modeling tool that helps you visualize and prepare for multiple Bitcoin futures. Beyond traditional retirement planning, it offers deep insight into how different adoption scenarios could transform your wealth trajectory. What sets this tool apart is that it's integrated with Unchained IRA, the only solution that combines the tax advantages of a retirement account with self-custody of Bitcoin. In any future state, maintaining control of your Bitcoin keys remains fundamental to your Bitcoin strategy. Explore your potential futures at unchained.com/TBL. Don't write your seed on paper. It's estimated that so much Bitcoin is lost forever, and the main culprit, the main reason is poor seed phrase security. This is why we use Stampseed, a DIY kit that enables you to hammer your seed phrases into titanium plates using professional stamping tools. These plates are heat resistant up to 3,000 degrees, fireproof, crush-proof, and time-proof. They're compact and easy to hide, and they can be used in your single sig or multi-sig setups. Make sure you go check them out today at stampseed.com and use code TBL for 15% off of your order.
So Bitcoin is still taxed as property, and capital gains is really stinging tax filers. And Eric Trump's been floating around the idea of like a 0% crypto tax since January. Can you just explain how these IRS rule changes going on might shake up Bitcoin taxation right now? Is there another big policy shift we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think that's one of the more complicated things that people who invest early on or start using Bitcoin and want to start using it, particularly for buying goods or services, or swapping for certain things out there, that there are tax implications. It's actually pretty wild. You don't think about it when you're spending your own money. You work, you have a salary, you have money in your account, and you go out and you get a haircut or you buy groceries. You don't think about the tax implications of doing so. But because of the way that the US system is set up, you have to think that way when it comes to Bitcoin and any other crypto offspring. So what they've had in place for a long time, as you mentioned, is that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are property. And if you buy something that, let's say you bought Bitcoin at $5,000 and then you're selling a portion of it to exchange for buying your haircut or buying a new computer, and it's at $100,000, you're having to do that capital gains calculation, and they're seeing that as a capital gain from you spending that Bitcoin. Now, that has been the rule now since 2013. What many different people in Congress and Senate and some in the policy space have mentioned is that we need to have a de minimis taxation rule. De minimis is the idea that under a certain amount, we do not try to collect any kind of duties or taxation, and we just allow it to occur as a normal transaction. This already occurs and exists under US law for foreign currencies. So if you bought euros, for instance, when it was at a low point, and then you're selling it again at the bank at a high point, and you make a bit of profit under $200, essentially the government says, not a big deal, we don't view that as a capital gain. Now, what people like Senator Ted Budd and obviously other people on the Republican side have discussed is let's have that sort of de minimis taxation rule applied broader to Bitcoin and crypto offspring, and let's set it at a reasonable limit. Some have said $600, some have said $200. Ideally, in a perfect policy space, it'd be anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, because again, people are using Bitcoin as money to buy and sell certain things. But that is something that has been brought up a lot. And right now, most of the tax changes or tracking is taking place at brokerages and exchanges. So the IRS has had different mechanisms for doing the accounting and seeing when you bought a certain coin, when you sold a certain coin, this kind of stuff. Generally, they're still sticking to the same accounting method. They've kind of delayed things by a year, which I know we've talked about on the program before. But for right now, the tax policies as they exist penalize you if you're using Bitcoin as a money. And that is exactly what has to change. Because if we're going to fulfill the promise of what Bitcoin is supposed to be, this kind of new sovereign asset that you can actually hold, where you have your private seed phrase, your private key, and you're able to spend it wherever in the world, we need to adjust that so that we can actually have a system that recognizes what Bitcoin means to us. It is, yes, a very good digital gold. It's very good as sort of your long-term savings, but we need to adjust the rules to make sure that we can also spend it and actually have it be the digital money of the internet that we all know that it is. We just need to have the laws reflect that. So we'd love to see a lot of changes on any kind of de minimis taxation rules. I think would be very helpful. There have been a lot of different rules, something called the Keep Your Coins Act, which also tries to protect self-custody. I think that's very important too. But the more that we can simplify this and at least offer a path so that people can use Bitcoin, they will not have to think about filing their taxes every time they go out to buy groceries or go out to the restaurant or try to pay for, a pair of golf clubs or something like that. That's a small thing that we kind of need in the law to change. And it's fairly simple to do. There are a few bills out there that are floating that hopefully we can support. But that's just an idea of what we could do.
What does the government have to understand about Bitcoin to adopt some of these tax policies?
I think one thing to understand is that Bitcoin is kind of seen as this sort of parallel system, but they kind of view it as trading cards, right? If you played Magic the Gathering, I'm not in that nerd world, but I play Pokemon cards, for instance, right? You did Pokemon cards, people would buy and sell, at recess on the gym, and there was a monetary value attached to the trading of this good, this thing that you would just get in a pack of cards, at Target or whatever store, and there existed a secondary market. And what I think a lot of our governmental regulators, public officials have to recognize, and many do, by the way, because you just look at their financial disclosures, and plenty of people are buying Bitcoin, stocking up on ETFs and the like. They have to understand that this is a kind of brand new monetary system that is independent, that is sovereign, and that is totally decentralized. How you can actually apply American tax law, income law to that in any special way, it's just next level impossible, because the more complicated that we make it, it just means we all become scofflaws. Nobody is actually going to report to the IRS the exact amount. The more that we make it more complicated to actually put a certain amounts or try to spend it, it just encourages people to go completely outside of the system. So as much as the Trump administration would like to capture gains from a better attitude towards Bitcoin and the crypto markets, the laws as they exist today really disincentivize that. So the government has to kind of recognize that people are using this not just as something fun to trade, but it's actually an alternative monetary system that does interact with the US dollar system and can interact with the US dollar system. We just need to be sure that we remove the regulatory barriers so that we can use it as we see fit, as normal consumers and as people who like Bitcoin, and not be penalized for it. I think that is one thing to realize. Thankfully, we do have now on both sides of the aisle a lot of very forward-thinking public officials and politicians, and now entire administrative agencies. You have David Sachs, who's the kind of crypto and artificial intelligence czar. You have Bo Hines, my fellow North Carolinian, and they're working on finding ways within the federal legislation or the rulemaking process or through executive orders to simplify it and to really codify into law the idea that these cryptocurrencies are not just games or collectible tokens. It's an actual economy where people are sovereign, they want to be private, and they want to be able to use this stuff to improve not only their lives, but the lives of their families and also all the great entrepreneurial efforts that come with that.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think we are in this process? How long do you think it'll take for the government to really adopt this forward-thinking tax policy regarding Bitcoin? Where do we stand currently?
It's a bit difficult to say because there's a lot of noise that's happening in DC. There's a lot of different initiatives. There are different sides that are pushing different policies, and you do have a very formidable presence of many crypto lobbying firms or crypto companies. A lot of money has been poured into this rather large debate. We saw at the White House there was this sort of digital assets, working group or seminar or whatever you call it, where they were talking about certain things, and they kind of mentioned various policies. And I think this is something to where we have to be really cued in to how the Constitution works. We have to be cued into what the role of Congress is and what the role of the president is, because most of the bad policies we're talking about are codified in law by Congress and have been signed into law by a president over time. So yes, it's great that Trump is leaning on executive orders. It's great that he's putting out, some great definitions and basically good ideas of what the crypto policies and Bitcoin policies should be. But we need to have codification of this stuff. That's why it's good to see any kind of Congressional Review Act movement that's happening in either the Senate or the House. You need to have bills that not only are introduced, but also followed up on. So Cynthia Lummis has the Bitcoin Act, which relates to the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. That is something that is not just an executive order that could be nullified by a future president. If passed, that would be something in law and enshrined. I think that's where a lot of focus has to be, is Trump is being a very good mascot, generally, I think, for the industry, not just because he has himself sort of a crypto company. He's kind of a crypto firm CEO, but also because you need smart Bitcoin policies that can really be there permanently. And the only way you can do that is allow Congress to pass them and go through the formal process, because otherwise many things will be struck down by courts, or they could be revoked with a pen in the next administration.
Well, I want to move in now into the next big policy update that's occurred since we've last had you on the Bitcoin layer. And one of that was the actual establishment of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. And one of the details of this is that the executive order that the acquisition of Bitcoin must be budget neutral. So I'm wondering, beyond using seized coins, what are creative strategies the government could do to build the Bitcoin reserve without using taxpayer funds?
Yeah, one thing I definitely point to is my colleagues at the Bitcoin Policy Institute have just written a great paper recently about Bitcoin bonds, sort of a way to, we'll say, strategically and uniquely and interestingly sort of stack U.S. treasuries and to have some kind of Bitcoin buying position. I think it's really interesting and fascinating. It's definitely the kind of new thinking that we need on these kind of policies, and also a way to kind of give a leg up to the U.S. government. I think those are pretty interesting. And there have been a lot of thoughts about the different funds that are housed within the Federal Reserve, sort of the exchange equalization fund. That is, again, another interesting way of doing it. There have been thoughts about if we have people buying these so-called gold cards for immigration, people getting their green cards through the system that has been pushed by Howard Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary. You could also allow people to use Bitcoin in order to buy. So if you had $5 million a pop in Bitcoin that came in and matched someone to have a visa, that'd be a way for the government to also acquire this kind of Bitcoin. Just generally, as a civil libertarian, I haven't been the biggest fan of allowing us to pay our taxes in Bitcoin. Some people might want to. Some states have tried. I know Colorado was sort of at the forefront of this and does allow people to pay using Bitcoin in taxes, but it's not really a decentralized solution. It's mostly through PayPal. It's not that's the best way of doing it. But I think there are, some interesting methods, and it is true that the basis of the strategic Bitcoin reserve, as envisioned and as seen as now, is based on those that have been claimed in civil asset forfeiture. And some of that, hopefully we all know where it is. We can track it down. I mean, there's some great sleuths on chain who've been seeing where it is. I think, looking at the bond angle is something that's really interesting. There's been so much policy focus on what the strategic Bitcoin reserve is doing, and I think there hasn't been enough focus right now on stablecoin legislation. Now, I'm not a huge user of stablecoins, but I think overall it is a very interesting way that we're trying to digitize a lot of money and having people buy treasuries as is required by law and will be under many of these stablecoin laws or provisions that are being discussed. And that is a way that you're kind of digitizing the next level of the American dollar without being a CBDC, which we don't want. We don't want anything that's centrally controlled. We don't want anything that's programmable by government. We don't want the ability to freeze people's money. None of that. But you're having this kind of big treasury first approach to figuring out how best we can use Bitcoin. So I think that is another additional layer that is interesting and would just add to a lot more liquidity, and also mean that you're going to have a lot more innovation using Bitcoin. And I think that is one of the most important things. The role of having government do anything with Bitcoin, in my opinion, has nothing to do with let's let the government get more Bitcoin. It has more to do with let me use it and remove the barriers that currently exist to me using Bitcoin as I see fit. And I think the more that we can orient our policy towards that, then I think we all improve along the way. And that's probably best for the United States and really the global economy in the end.
Mm-hmm. What will we see if the government takes more of a you guys can use Bitcoin approach? What innovation exactly?
Yeah, I think there's been some experiments. There are a lot of people who are, working in Nashville or you've seen a lot of this in San Francisco. People are using insurance products when it comes to Bitcoin. People who are looking at, different, prediction markets and using Bitcoin. The advantages of using something like Bitcoin for all of these properties is that you can actually track it on chain. You can have different custody setups so that you know that certain people will have a key in case something happens. There's a lot of stuff with inheritance. There's just this new entire economy that could exist if you would allow people to use this, touch it, send it, receive it, and do it as an ordinary money with all the different tax implications or having to apply the Bank Secrecy Act. I think that is probably number one for a lot of people, because we don't have to basically use the Bank Secrecy Act to try to track down every single dollar in our financial system. nor should we want to do it or be forced to do it when it comes to Bitcoin. So there are a lot of opportunities there. There's plenty of innovators who would love to do this, would like to get involved. I mean, I'm just remembering going back to 2014, 15, Bitcoin was actually a central payment processor for so many companies. If you use something like Expedia, hotels.com, a bunch of flights, Microsoft Online, like if you actually bought products and services or tried to book a flight, at that time you could use Bitcoin. And it was very normal, and it was seen as something that you could route around the credit card transaction fees. We have to somehow get back to that, because that, in a way, will push a new layer of innovation that really will bring those benefits that I think most of us are waiting for. We'd love to see a lot more structured financial products. Sure, degen traders love all this stuff, but I think just all of those great qualities of Bitcoin that exist with it being supply limited, with being able to send it around the world at very low fees, with the ability to actually hold it sovereignly. There's so many options that really we should unlock and try to do so with as many smart Bitcoin policies as possible.
So Expedia really was using Bitcoin back in, 2014, 2016 as a payment processor before
Absolutely,
Bitcoin started being
bro.
regulated?
I could go back through my email and send you the receipts right now. Like I remember booking a hotel room on Expedia. I was in Poland, and I was there for a week, and it just popped up the Bitcoin address. You sent it there. I don't even remember what the payment process, like whatever Bitcoin processing thing they were using, but it worked well. It settled, and once the payment was settled, I got my confirmation email, and it was like, great. A lot of this obviously goes back to kind of the block size war and the debate about how large the blocks were. And, some of that spooked many larger companies and corporations from accepting Bitcoin. But I think now with advancement in the Lightning Network, specifically with a layer 2 that has so much more liquidity now, and people are using it for all kinds of things, and we have instantaneous payments, I think it's a good time to start advertising the benefits of this system again. Because there is an entire parallel economy. Think of podcasting 2.0. Think of people who are using Nostr. There's an entire world where people are using Lightning in real time to do things. It's not always front and center in our conversation, but there's so much innovation that's happening there. It's like too quick. I mean, if you just go to Stacker News, stacker.news, you can see every day new products, new things launching, new things spinning up on GitHub. It's just crazy to see. And look, I try to track this stuff as much as possible, but knowing how busy I am and so many other people are, it's very difficult to figure out what we can use next. So I really do have very positive thoughts about how that is moving, because this is like a cypherpunk movement. That's why Bitcoin exists. You have this sort of techno-libertarian underpinning, skepticism of centralized power. That stuff will continue regardless, and we should continue to support it. I think it's just incumbent on at least people like me who are in policy and others who have some influence to try to gauge the conversation in regulatory world towards one to where we can actually improve all those benefits and hopefully profit from them too.
Why did policymakers start coming after Bitcoin in the first place after companies started using it, like huge companies like this?
Yeah, it's kind of a thing to where it's not as if many policymakers or regulatory officials were necessarily targeting Bitcoin. I think it's just that there's a lot of unknown. No one knew what was happening exactly. There was not really a method where you could put it in a box. So it's just that it was very foreign and strange to our very rigid regulatory system. And that's why the IRS in 2013 just said, all right, cool, it's settled. This thing is property. Do your own thing. People started talking about money transmission licenses. Okay, let's slap on a couple of those there too. Oh, and we have all these Bank Secrecy Act regulations about KYC and anti-money laundering laws. Let's just slap some more on there too. So I think it's just that there was no unique box where you could put something like Bitcoin. So we didn't come up with the innovative ideas yet. And I think that's why the American Federalist model is so interesting, because many states are approaching this differently. You do have really interesting regulatory sandboxes that are allowing companies to invest and innovate and people to come up with products and not have to worry about registration and regulation just yet until we can figure it out. Because that's something that we've just seen far too often in probably the last 2 decades of sort of regulation and government power, is that there's this move to regulate something first before we even understand it or understand its implications. That is a European kind of style of thinking about it. It's something called the precautionary principle. As long as there's some risk out there that somebody will lose money or somebody will get harmed, we have to already create the rules and have that prior restraint. The normal American style is innovate first, figure out the solutions, may the best rules win, and then we apply those so that people have certainty in the market, consumers are protected. It also means that innovation can develop and we can all win from those gains too.
It is interesting that while Bitcoiners see Bitcoin as, say, a safe haven asset, it's still tied to risk assets, or the market still ties it to risk assets. Do you think we'll ever see a point where the governments and the markets see Bitcoin as being on par with gold as a government asset? Because gold has just had an insane run right now with all this market uncertainty.
Yeah, you're asking about the great decoupling. It's difficult to say. There's already a lot of traditional money that is flowing into Bitcoin. Bitcoin layer fans know as much as anyone, inflows on ETFs, outflows of this, and all the different products and layered. And man, I saw something the other day. So Robinhood obviously is a big Bitcoin and crypto player now, and they're listed, all these different structured ETFs using backwards bonds, yield max strategies. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of money that's going into this from the traditional finance world, and we still haven't seen huge price jumps or anything up. So I don't know. I'm not a price guy. I don't know much about it. I'm not sure. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. But you can see that there's all this pressure and people who are looking for some kind of safe haven. Because Bitcoin is, yes, it exists independently, but we're using it in a context where we have trade wars, where we had tariffs, where we have increasing taxes, where we have an uncertain budget, where we have a $36 trillion debt that shackles each and every one of us, $50,000. So I think people are wanting to have some kind of alternative. And traditionally, if you go back to Europe or different parts of Africa or Latin America, people have flocked towards gold because gold has always been there. And, Nick has written a lot about that. Many others have always written about why gold was this asset. And I think people are starting to understand it. Often it's this kind of chicken and egg scenario because many people are being exposed to Bitcoin for the first time through traditional financial products, through their brokerage or through ETFs, and not sort of the sovereign way, the technical way that some of us who adopted Bitcoin earlier, how we found it. Right. How we found it was, learning about seed phrases, sending addresses, UTXOs, batching UTXOs, understanding mobile wallets, desktop wallets, hot wallets. It's not something that the traditional sort of financial investors looking at Bitcoin knows about or has been exposed to. So I think we just need to have introduction of both of those forks. We need to continue that kind of cypherpunk technological age of Bitcoin, still allow people to be able to use it a lot more. And that means that people kind of wake up to what the alternative of Bitcoin is. You're absolutely right. Right now, it is tied to generally the stock market or asset prices, a little bit of inflation. It's just been very hard to gauge, I think, with most things when it comes to the economy or when it comes to politics. Things are kind of oscillating in all different directions. And I think what should give many investors or Bitcoin holders really a lot of refuge at the end of the night is that the Bitcoin network just keeps ticking along. It's block after block. It's consistent. All these nodes are verifying everything. Miners are competing to try to get that block reward. That is actually some stability that we, I think, as communicators in the Bitcoin space or beyond, have to figure out how we can actually package up and sell that too. Because it's one of the best things about Bitcoin is that there's this distributed, decentralized network running at all times. Like right here in my office, I can hear my computer humming. Like it's running, it's right there. It's like within my finger's grasp. I can go to my block explorer. And I think that is just something that we have to communicate a lot better to many of the average investing class and probably to boomers or even young people. I think that's something really important.
Absolutely. The only network that's been up for 16 years straight. That's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't know if you could say that about the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank. They have their issues and things are offline all the time. I mean, think of any of the large tech platforms that have literally billions of dollars worth of money and running servers, and like they're down all the time. So just imagine that compared with the world's hardest monetary asset running decentralized on all these computers around the globe. Hard to compete.
I guess the issue is it's just so much more difficult for the general public and then also the government to understand how it all works versus something as simple as gold just found in the earth. That's why Bitcoin education is so important, and why the work that the Bitcoin Policies Institute is doing, because how are policymakers, many of them that don't have a lot of technical background, supposed to look at the Bitcoin network and be like, yeah, that makes sense to me?
Yeah, it's going to be different based on who you're talking to. Obviously it's Congress, so mostly lawyers, so they understand ledgers, contracts. They kind of understand that part. When it comes to the nodes and how they interact and sort of proof of work algorithm, that's where it's a bit more difficult. But I think a lot of my colleagues at BPI have been very good at explaining to both left and right, because again, there's no sort of political ideological monopoly when it comes to Bitcoin, is that this is just a different asset that is trustless. You're not having to trust somebody at a central bank. You're not having to trust a company that's issuing stock. You have a network that's there and a code that is as hard as stone. It is written into the code that everybody is running on their computer that there is a fixed supply, and this is how the network runs. So I think that's kind of where a lot of the newer crypto economy and crypto traders, everyone denigrates Bitcoin because it is sort of grandfather tech, right? It's sort of the genesis, the number one. But the reason it's so consistent and the reason that people save in Bitcoin is because it has stood the test of time. Nation state attacks, attempted hacks of exchanges and brokerages. These are all been vulnerabilities, not in the code, not in the network, but in basically third-party people trying to touch the network. So I think a lot more of that story has to be told too, is that there are FTX scams that blow up. There are Celsius scams that blow up, but these have nothing to do with the network that undergirds Bitcoin. It has everything to do with the greed of people who are toppling things onto Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, who are taking away your sovereign seeds. And when you're using a trusted third party, you should know that there's risk. And I think that's nothing new to the financial world, definitely nothing new to the Bitcoin world. It's just something that I think we have to translate a lot more to a mainstream audience so that people understand the real value of holding something like Bitcoin.
So overall, Bitcoin policy shifting pretty quickly. What are the changes you would tell our audience to watch and look out for over the next few months, and why?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, independent of what you think of it, is it opens the Overton window, has allowed for us to talk about positive changes that we can do in the American legal system to make sure that people can use Bitcoin and not be penalized for it. So unfortunately, this happens in the shadow of, as I mentioned before, some of these exchanges going bust, brokerages going bust. I mean, the largest ever hack of any crypto exchange ever, billions of dollars. You have all this stuff that's happening in the background and people connecting that to Bitcoin, the asset, or Bitcoin, the network. So I think we have to obviously decouple that. So I do think there's some interesting stuff for market structure that have been discussed. Again, those stablecoin bills I mentioned, these aren't necessarily going to change the way that Bitcoin acts, not at all, but it will allow financial institutions, entrepreneurs, innovators to figure out how to use Bitcoin legally and not have to worry about registering or putting on additional tax layers or essentially getting penalized by the FDIC or the Federal Reserve or the OCC or the CFPB. I mean, there's all the sort of alphabet soup of government organizations that could go after you if you're a traditional financial firm or any kind of innovator that has some kind of non-custodial software. We still have the developers of Samurai Wallet, for instance, that are still going through their trials right now. And that has to do with money transmission licenses. So that's something that should be modernized as well. I think there will be a push right now towards money transmission licenses, basically the ability to send money on behalf of someone else. There are a lot of very good packages for reform. Many of them have come from the state level, allowing reciprocity. In Florida, if you have a license, you should be able to use it in Iowa or in California. So there's some very good ideas there. The de minimis taxation that I mentioned is something that has been talked about a lot, that I think if there's a bit more pressure, could even be upped to that $100,000 limit that we'd love to see. And then I think there's something called the Keep Your Coins Act, which relates to self-custody. That's something that we should enshrine in law as much as possible. It's a general principle, and it is, like my favorite Bitcoin policies of all time, a preemptive measure. What we're doing is we're forbidding the government from going too far with their laws when it comes to my Bitcoin holdings and my self-custody Bitcoin. And there's already a bill there. It's already been supported sort of both by Democrats and Republicans. Having a Keep Your Coins Act introduced would be probably something that we need more than anything. This is a way that you can try to trim the different regulatory imbalances that you have in the government now. And certainly if you have weaponization of our regulatory system and lawfare, we'd love to see that too. Any of the IRS, broker changes obviously going through. So I think these are fairly hopeful that many of these will happen or kind of will be etched into law very soon. But again, it's incumbent on us as sort of activists or people talking about this in the communication space to hold many of these politicians' feet to the fire, because we're going to use this technology no matter what. But why is it not in your interest as a lawmaker, as a politician, as a public official, to make sure that your constituents, that your voters or non-voters can benefit from it as well? I think we need a lot more of that.
Well, Yaël, thank you so much. This was a fantastic update, and I'm feeling very optimistic about the future.
I am too, Demian. I think there's so much that's happening, and it's kind of hard because there's crypto kind of whirlwinds, and many of us who are just stacking sats and being quiet and happy, and trying to just get by day to day. A lot of that is going over our heads, but I think there are some better approaches, more mature approaches that are happening now, and it means that finally the rest of us can be unleashed. We can enjoy the network and all of its benefits. And that means that everyone else can kind of enjoy the digital gold that we're really so nerded out about, I think, for so long. All right. Well, thank you so much, Demian. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and best of luck with Bitcoin Layer.
Thank you. We'll catch you guys next time.